Well, one of the key elements to all of this is the sheer number of people, urban migration, people coming into cities and metros around our city, people moving from rural areas to the nearest big town and then perhaps to the nearest city. Graeme Gotz is the Director of Research at the Gauteng City Region Observatory. Graeme, good afternoon to you. Probably most of the people living in this building didn't grow up in Joburg. How many people are coming into the city? Where are they coming from?
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for the opportunity to be on your show. I think maybe I should just put it like this, that there's a strange and rather gruesome irony in the fact that this building used to be the Central Pass office back in the 60s and 70s, as you've just pointed out. Because part of the context for what we're seeing in inner city Joburg is the huge movement of people from other provinces and from other countries. And I need to emphasize, because often this is couched in xenophobic terms, that there's the influx of foreign migrants. It's people moving in from other parts of the country into the city and have nowhere to stay. So just by way of context, across Gauteng as a whole, the population of the city region has increased from just under 10 million in the early 2000s to just over 16 million today. And we at the GCO often use as a metaphor, and I emphasize it's a metaphor, that the region growing at approximately 1.6 to 1.8 million people every 5 years is a region growing by the size of a Soweto every 5 years, which is it's an extraordinary movement of people into the city, and it's an extraordinary challenge. We may get to this, Stephen, but I also want to make the point that it's not just people coming into the city that's the challenge. It's the lack of investment of people in urban lives, and this feeling that you're never really part of the city, so you've got to hedge your bets and also be making investments in rural livelihoods that is part of this problem. We can get into that if you like.
So it's the idea that people have two identities. Everyone, I live in Joburg, but I go home for Christmas, is what you mean?
Yeah, I think it's much more than that, and I think it's accelerated over the last couple of years, especially with the COVID situation having increased the feeling of risk and vulnerability across the landscape of South Africa. You'll see what were once homeland settlements rapidly developing, Tuscan-style villas, and I'm not joking if you've ever driven around the edges of the Kruger Park or on Nelspruit, Rustenburg, etc. Tuscan-style villas are going up on traditional land, and what's happening there is people are reinvesting in homeland areas. They want a space that they can feel like they can take care of their family if all other things go wrong. It's also a place to put money that you've earned in urban areas, but you feel like you can't invest that in urban lives because urban lives are actually not that great at the moment. Our inability to manage our urban space as well means that people don't want to be here. And so what they do is they hedge their bets. They try and live as cheaply as possible, often in buildings like what we saw burned down today, in order to make alternative livelihoods and alternative futures, retirement options in rural areas. So that I think is part of the context here. It's not just rapid influx migration. That's part of the story.
So what then? I mean, there are other cities that will have similar problems, other cities around the world that will have this kind of urban migration. I don't know if they'll quite have the feature that you describe, and I've seen similar houses not just in the north of the country, but in the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal. You see it too, you see it in many places. How then should a city manage this challenge? What we're really talking about is increasing the stock, both privately held and publicly held, of really cheap, safe accommodation.
Absolutely. There's 2 points in what you've just said, Stephen, that are worth picking up on. We are not the fastest growing city region in the world. In fact, there's some work that's suggesting that over the next century, places like Lagos or Kinshasa are going to grow to the scale of 60 to 80 million people. This is science fiction territory. The Gauteng city region, the city of Johannesburg, is not going to reach those kind of proportions. And there's a good argument to say that if we can get things right here, we've got something to teach other places in the world that are going to urbanize much more quickly than we are. So what is it that we can potentially teach the rest of the world, if I can be so bold? Well, the answer to that question is much more effective governance of these kinds of crises. Our responses to these kind of crises tend to be knee-jerk, tend to be let's deal with the problem immediately at hand, with lots of blame going on about who should have done what, and we never get to the point where we are strategic about the full nature of the problem in all its complexity, the multidimensional nature of a wicked challenge like this. And I do want to make the point that we really need to break it down and understand the challenge in its full complexity. We're dealing with lack of bylaw enforcement, as some people have said, certainly. We're dealing with the collapse of capability within the state, within local government to effectively implement the bylaws. We're dealing with collapsed sectional title arrangements where people have bought into properties, but then because they don't have the experience, or because there are certain elements within the building, the sectional title arrangements in the building just collapse and people are sitting with zero investment for the properties that they've bought. We're dealing with hijackers, most certainly, and a multitude of other things. And we need to break the problem down and understand its full complexity and tackle it in a sustained and coherent way over long periods of time. So I've seen lots of, I've been following the news over the last couple of hours. I've seen lots of politicians standing up and saying, well, when I was in charge, or when I will be in charge potentially next year, I will take a krachtdadige approach and make sure that no one occupies these kind of buildings. Well, removing people from these kind of buildings is a fraction of the solution. You need to think about it at all levels in a multiplicity of different ways. It starts with housing. And it starts with providing adequate housing, working together with a range of different stakeholders at all levels of the housing ladder. It's not just about, I want to emphasize this point, it's not just about providing housing to the poorest of the poor. It's providing housing at all levels of the housing ladder so that the middle and lower classes, teachers, policemen, etc., don't have nowhere else to go, and so they downward raid into buildings that would normally be occupied by poorer people.
Graeme, very quickly if you can, and sorry to interrupt you, but you talk about the same kind of policy, proper policy being implemented over a long period of time. We have coalition politics in Joburg at the moment. That would seem to me to make it unlikely to happen.
Absolutely, and I think that's such a crucial point that we're not really focusing on. I think it's basically coalition politics, which makes things incredibly unstable. There's a lack of leadership. And officials, dedicated officials who can think clearly about these problems, not really being able to cohere a clear strategy. The political system, the signals in the political system are not right at this point in time for things to happen coherently over long periods of time. Some people have suggested, or gone as far as to suggest, that this kind of messy politics, this noise in the system, it suits an agenda. An agenda of corruption where people can't be held accountable for the things that they haven't done. And we really need to fix that kind of politics for people to be able to do their job well over a sustained period.
Graeme Gotz, thank you. Director of Research at the Gauteng City Region Observatory. Just to update you, we understand that the briefing that was due to start at 4 o'clock has been moved to 4:30, so we will bring that to you when it starts. In the meantime, 61 people now being treated at various health facilities in Gauteng after that fire in the Joburg CBD.